Hey there, and welcome back to the start of our girls' trips to the Philippines. This journey takes us from London to Cebu across to Bohol and a few unforgettable days on a tiny island. Let's get into it. This trip started with a long journey from London, stopping over in Hong Kong before finally arriving in Cebu. After all that traveling, there was only one thing on the agenda: food. We headed to House of Luncheon for dinner to try some traditional Filipino dishes, and it was the perfect way to kick off the trip. The next morning, we caught the ferry over to Bohol. Once we arrived, we checked into Scent of Green Papaya, so here's a little room tour. It had a really relaxed feel and was just a short tuk-tuk ride from the beach. Not long after settling in, we made our way to Alona Beach. It's probably Bohol's best known beach, with soft white sand, clear water, and plenty of cafes and restaurants along the shore. We stopped for lunch at Oasis Resort before spending the afternoon doing very little, which was exactly what we needed. I found a spot on the beach, opened Haruki Murakami's novel, The City of Its Uncertain Walls, and just enjoyed the sound of the waves while everyone else relaxed nearby. Later that evening, we headed back to the hotel for dinner and called it a night. The next morning started with breakfast at the hotel before heading to Bohol's Beach Club, where we booked a day pass. The beach there was beautiful, with powdery white sand and calm turquoise water. We managed to go for a swim before the weather suddenly changed and a huge thunderstorm rolled in. Instead of letting the rain ruin the day, we found somewhere dry, watched the Formula One together, and waited for the storm to pass. Lunch was included with the day pass, which made things even easier. Once the weather settled a bit, I treated myself to a massage before finding a hammock and getting back to my book. That evening, we returned to Alona Beach for dinner, where I finally tried chicken adobo for the first time. It's often considered the national dish of the Philippines, made by slowly cooking meat in soy sauce, vinegar, garlic, and spice. It was so good that I immediately understood why everyone recommends trying it. We wrapped up the evening with ice cream popsicles and a walk along the beach. Day 4 started with another hotel breakfast before joining a yoga session just next door. It was such a peaceful way to start the morning. We then wandered into town for a bit of souvenir shopping, grabbed an iced latte, and slowly walked back to the hotel. The weather wasn't looking very promising that afternoon, so we ended up spending the rest of the day at another nearby resort. We didn't even need to pay to get in, as we stayed at the restaurant for lunch. Most of the afternoon was spent playing a surprisingly competitive dice game, reading, and also watching some of the girls paint. The clouds eventually cleared up just enough for a really lovely sunset before we headed back. The following day was all about exploring more of Bohol. We booked a full day island tour through the hotel, starting with the famous Chocolate Hills. During the dry season, these hills turn brown, giving them their chocolate-like appearance, and there are well over 1,000 of them spread across the landscape. Then our next stop was Pangas Falls, and it was followed by one of the places I was most excited to visit, the Philippine Tarsier Sanctuary. Tarsiers are some of the smallest primates in the world, with enormous eyes that almost look too big for their tiny bodies. They're also incredibly shy, so everyone has to stay quiet while walking through the sanctuary. From there, we drove through the man-made forest, a beautiful stretch of mahogany trees that create this incredible green tunnel along the road. Lunch was served during a cruise along the Loboc River, with tropical scenery passing by while we ate. It was such a relaxing part of the day. Our final cultural stop was the Baclayon Church, one of the oldest stone churches in the Philippines dating back to the Spanish colonial period. Before heading back to the hotel, we squeezed in one last stop at White Beach for a well-earned swim. Then it was back to Oasis Resort for dinner, followed by an evening playing cards together. The next part of the trip had ended up being my favorite. We were heading to Pamilacan Island for one night, leaving from the Baclayon port. The only problem was that we didn't organize transport across. We arrived hoping someone could help us find a boat. And after asking around, we eventually found locals heading back to the island with all their groceries for the week. They let us join them, and that's how we made it across. When we first arrived, there were quite a few visitors on the island, but after lunch, everyone headed back to the mainland. Suddenly, it felt like we had almost the entire island to ourselves. Here is a quick worm tour. We even had a balcony overlooking the sea. Then it was finally time for my very first snorkeling experience. It definitely took me a while to get used to breathing through the mask, but once I relaxed, I absolutely loved it. Our first stop was to see the sea turtles before moving over to the coral reef. Everyone had to wear life jackets to make sure nobody accidentally touched the coral, and it was honestly one of the most beautiful things I've seen underwater. We spent around an hour there, but I could easily have stayed much longer. The rest of the afternoon was wonderfully simple, more reading, a few local beers, chatting on the beach, watching the sunset with the island-friendly dogs, and then dinner. The food at this hotel was easily the best of the entire trip. The following morning was just as relaxed. I finished reading The City of Its Uncertain Walls, which I ended up really enjoying. Murakami is probably one of my favorite authors, so it was the perfect place to finish one of these books. I also went back into the water hoping to spot more turtles. They were definitely around because everyone else saw them, but somehow they completely avoided me this time. Eventually, it was time to leave. We caught the only afternoon boat back with the same lady who had helped us the day before. I genuinely could have spent the rest of the holidays on Pamilacan. It felt completely disconnected from everything else, and it was exactly the kind of place where time slows down. Back on Bohol, we checked into Ohana Resort. It was another lovely hotel, and we spent the evening chatting by the swimming pool before getting some rest. The next morning started before sunrise as we headed out for another boat tour. Watching the sun come up over Alona Beach was worth the early alarm. Although we'd booked our own boat, there must have been around 20 others heading in the same direction. On the way to Balicasag Island, we were lucky enough to spot a pod of dolphins. It was amazing to see them, although it was a little disappointing watching so many boats crowd around them. Once we reached Balicasag, we went straight into the water for more snorkeling. Compared to Pamilacan, it felt much busier. The coral reef also wasn't in the same condition, with much of it looking grey rather than colorful. We then moved to the turtle area, where the water was much deeper. There were lots of people searching around, and just as I thought I wasn't going to see anything, one turtle suddenly appeared right in front of me and calmly swam past. It was such a special moment. From there, we continued on to Virgin Island before making our way back to Alona Beach. The rest of the afternoon was spent relaxing back at the resort. I started a new book, Murder at the Black Cat Cafe. It's made up of several short stories, which took me a little while to get used to it, but it was a nice read in the end. Before we knew it, it was time to leave Bohol. The ferry terminal was incredibly busy, and our ferry ended up being delayed, but eventually we made it back to Cebu. We stopped by Fort San Pedro, the oldest triangular fort in the Philippines, originally built by the Spanish in the 16th century. We also visited Cebu Metropolitan Cathedral, but a service was taking place, so we kept our visiting short before checking into Cebu, our hotel. For our final dinner in the Philippines, we found a nearby burger restaurant and microbrewery called Sal's. We spent the evening eating, playing cards, and chatting about everything we've done over the past week. The final day arrived far too quickly. At Cebu Airport, we picked up a few last-minute souvenirs, grabbed one final coffee, and then began the journey home, flying back through Hong Kong before finally arriving in London. Thanks so much for coming along on our girls' trip, and I'll see you in the next adventure.